Good morning all, here in the studio and to those online. Welcome to this press conference, which is a prelude to the 40th meeting of the Conference of Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community. To bring us all up to date on what will take place over the next following 2 days, on Thursday and Friday and Wednesday as well, 3 days, we have with us the Secretary General of the Caribbean Community, His Excellency Ambassador Irwin LaRocque. The Ambassador, the Secretary General, will make opening remarks, following which he will take your questions. Ambassador LaRocque.
Thank you, Leonard. And let me say good morning to members of the media here and those who are following us. I understand we are streamed live. I want to say a pleasant good morning, but I want to thank you very much for being here with us, joining, giving me the opportunity to share with you what the next few days hold for us. As you know, that the 40th meeting of the Heads of Government will be held here in St. Lucia, under the chairmanship of the Prime Minister, Honorable Alan Chastney, who assumed the chair on the 1st of July. We expect a full house of member states. All member states will be represented. We will have 11 heads of government joining us as far as the member states, and we have 4 heads from the associate members. So we have a fairly full house, and the other member states are represented at the ministerial level. We expect to have 2 special guests with us. Honorable Erna Solberg, the Prime Minister of Norway, will be a special guest and will interact with heads. And His Excellency Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, will also be here with us for an interaction with the heads. The opening ceremony, as you may know by now, will take place on Wednesday afternoon at 4:30 at the Royalton Hotel. There will be 4 speakers: the Chairman, Prime Minister Chastney; the immediate past Chairman, Prime Minister Timothy Harris of St. Kitts and Nevis, and as well as the Secretary General of the United Nations. He'll also address the opening ceremony, and of course yours truly will give some opening remarks. The agenda basically will be looking at some of the items that we have been looking for in terms of what progress are being made. The CARICOM single market and economy will feature prominently once again. You know that we had set some timelines and a work plan that had been agreed to by heads of government, and basically we'll be getting an update on who has done what and who has not done what, and see how we move forward. There has been some progress, but not as much as I think we all might anticipate, and for some of it for good reason. The private sector, labor and civil society will join us. Representatives of the private sector, labor and civil society will join us for the discussions on the CSME. They are representative of the persons who will be using, the population at large will be using, who have to make use of the CSME. So we'll be hearing from them in terms of how best we could make it more usable and user-friendly. There's also going to be a discussion, proposals by recognizing the private sector, regional private sector body that will be representative and be an interlocutor between the various organs of the community and the private sector. We've also, I think at the last meeting, we already recognized the CCL as an associate institution, and I guess at some point we'll have to be doing the same for civil society. That is just showing that we're seeking to be more interactive, more consultative with the population at large, the stakeholders. I should just mention, last night I had a very interesting interaction with the youth of the region through the CARICOM Youth Ambassador Corps, and they too are asking for some sort of entree so that there can be some dialogue and not just tokenism, as they put it, with regards to representation. So the CSME will be one of the major items, and that a link to that is the Commission on the Economy. We had reappointed the Commission on the Economy, and the Commission was given one year to do its work, and they started the work earlier this year, and they're to give an interim report. The Commission is chaired by Dr. Avinash Prasad of Barbados, and is made up of a number of prominent individuals, not only regional persons, but 1 or 2 from out of the region, and they will be given an update on that. And that, of course, is linked to the CSME, and is linked, of course, to the issue of growth and sustainable growth in our region. Another item on the agenda is blacklisting. It's a problem that is not going away. Many of our countries have been blacklisted. Many of our countries have done what they've asked to be done, and yet they get themselves back on another list. The goalpost keeps shifting, and we have a a discussion and a strategy on how to go forward. That strategy has been put in place. Prime Minister Shastri himself has been leading on that, along with Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Prime Minister Brown. So I think that's going to be for a very interesting discussion. But the issue is that we're being blacklisted, and very often we're not even being consulted to see what we're doing. That is the member states. Crime and security will also feature very prominently on the agenda. It's another constant. There's already very strong cooperation on crime and security, but we are seeking to strengthen that cooperation and collaboration among the security apparatus in the region. And that's going to be a key point. As you know, we've been putting some of the regional legal framework in place, but I think now we're trying to see how we can even step up greater collaboration among the security personnel. As I mentioned to you, Prime Minister of Norway will have an interaction, and the UN Secretary General will have an interaction. And some of the issues that will be raised with them are issues of grave concern to us. Climate change, sustainable ocean economy. The Prime Minister of Norway heads a panel on the blue economy, which is something that our region is looking at, and the pollution of our oceans, sustainable development goals. These are some of the issues that we will be engaging both of them on. And the Secretary General of the United Nations will be hosting a series of very important meetings in September. So it will also give the heads an opportunity to hear about the plans for those meetings, as well as to see how we get our views forward on financing for development, on the issue of resilience building, on the issue of access to financing for the sustainable development goals. So we expect very, very good discussions with the two of them. And since resilience will be an issue that the Prime Minister Shastri, as chairman, will be putting forward in terms of what are some of the areas, how do we get financing to, for resilience. It's very easy to get financing after a hurricane, but you need to build resilience before the hurricane, before the disaster strikes or the earthquake. And access to such financing is costly. And how do we get concessional financing to build resilience? So this is another issue we're going to be discussing. There are other items on the agenda, such as science and technology, which will be introduced preliminarily, and a discussion that would relate to our relations with the African diaspora will also be discussed. Of course, we expect the border issues, Guyana, Venezuela, and Belize, Guatemala to also be discussed, and an update on what's happening there. So that basically is a quick tour of what are the items on the agenda that will be discussed starting on, well, Thursday and Friday. There will be a closing press conference, so again we'll invite you and be able to report on what actually happened. So that's about the tour.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. We will now take your questions, and please remember when you are asking your questions to state your name and the agency which you represent.
Janika Simon from Choice TV. Is it working? I'm hoping so. Secretary General, thank you so much for your time today and for taking our questions. I have a question about CSME. In 2017, I believe, it was Jamaica who had a commission to review that country's engagement with CARICOM and CARIFORUM. The report that was issued was, shall we say, not very salutary in terms of the single market and economy, its impact on CARICOM citizens' lives, as well as the benefits that it was bringing to Jamaica and by extension the rest of the region. Could you tell me, since that report came out, what discussions or what actions have been taken to strengthen the framework and to make it better functioning for the lives of CARICOM citizens, please?
Okay, you would recall that the report, as you said, came out, and it was first tabled in 2017 in Montego Bay in Jamaica. And there was a discussion, a more thorough discussion, when the heads met in special session in Trinidad and Tobago in December of 2018. And that led to what I referred to as the implementation plan. Out of that, some timelines were set to get some things done. And most of those, I would say about 90–95% of those things are things to be done by the member states. And the timelines were laid out to carry us over a period of, I believe, 3 or 4 years. That is the plan I referred to that is going to be under review at the session today. The trade ministers had a look at it, because the trade ministers are the ones that are going to be monitoring it more and more. The Jamaica Commission report raised a number of other issues that pertain to the general operation of CARICOM, some of which we already have in train, and which is going to be applied to not only the CSME, but just about every work program that we put in place. Results-based management. We have to show results for what we're doing. And the Caribbean Development Bank has been very, very helpful in working with us, financing a results-based management system, not only for the Secretariat, but for the regional institutions, as well as for member states. We're actually going to be proposing to the member states that they now need to do that, so that one can be accountable for the commitments that are made when you do so at a meeting. Very often, it's not a secret, commitments are made and the dates pass and we haven't done it. So despite all the work, all the groundwork may have been prepared. So we're going to be having a more focused look. I think Prime Minister Motley has really taken up that challenge and is leading the charge in that regard. So that is the plan that we've referred to. That will be reviewed and quote-unquote a report card of sorts will be given today.
MBC Television in Lucia. Good morning, gentlemen. My question has to do with agriculture and food security. One of the biggest criticisms of CARICOM as a bloc is that, well, some of the criticisms point to that there appears to be not that big a move, or you see no steps towards actually ensuring food security as it relates to reducing our food import bill. Could you speak to us about what steps CARICOM is taking right now? Because one of the points that has been raised is that we, as a region, as a subgrouping, is should be strong enough for certain countries or certain members to be able to at least supply certain foods and certain which are native or endemic to their respective countries as a bid to reducing this import bill. So could you speak to CARICOM's efforts, please?
Sure. The food import bill is very, very significant. It's more than $4 billion in our region. The food import bill in itself presents opportunities, but it also presents challenges because, as you know, of that $4 million, if you dissect it down into what are the various types of foods that we import, not everything is produced in our region. A substantial amount of it is not produced in our region. That notwithstanding, it leaves the opportunity open for production in those items in which we can produce. And we have, at the CARICOM level, prepared and adopted a food and nutrition security policy. Member states have used that. It was done in a modular format, and member states have used that to develop their own national food and nutrition security policies, and some of them have actually gone further and done action plans. And the Secretariat has worked with these member states all along the way, in sometimes even providing technical support through funding that we may have received from FAO or one of the other organizations. If FAO and IECA have collaborated with us very, very much on that, and CARI. It's a collaborative effort to work with the member states, and where if I'm not mistaken, just about all of the member states, technical assistance was provided to the member states to prepare national action plans. Now, what is the status of that? I don't have that information at hand. But the issue of food security across our community also has questions of sanitary and phytosanitary, the standards to allow foods to go in, for instance, that we're working on as well. The issue of transportation is one that bedevils us, because if you get the first produce to market on time is another issue. So there are a number of issues that we're working on at different fronts. That one of the things that will be discussed that has been raised with the private sector, I mentioned that they'll be meeting with us. It will not take place at this setting, but it has been done preliminarily. What would be needed for the private sector to boost production of various products? And of course, agro-industry is a critical one for us. What is needed? What we do with the CSME is to create the environment to allow for the trade in goods to take place without any hindrance, as much as is possible. But the governments don't produce. The Secretariat doesn't produce anything in terms of food, that is. We produce a lot of documents, but not food. But Peter, behave yourself. But it's the private sector who produce the food, and what is it that we require for them. So that will be another discussion that we're hoping to have with the private sector at the next sitting.
But just to follow up to that, I will just point to St. Lucia about 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, where our Ministry of Agriculture sought to increase the quota of local chicken and to be purchased by our supermarkets and our purchase of local chicken, and it was met with great resistance by our Chamber of Commerce and their members, who saw it as a cheaper alternative. So my question to you is that would CARICOM be more encouraging of governments to give concessions to their local producers as to reduce those costs of those production costs? Because I think from what I gather, one of the biggest issues by these retailers, those sellers, is that the cost of purchasing locally is too high, whereas they could purchase chicken from the United States at much lower cost, which you hear on the ground that these things are sometimes 2-3 years old, they've been packed in containers, they're stuffed with preservatives. So is it time that maybe CARICOM or those boys should be more forceful in terms of getting each country to provide more concessions to their local producers and businesses in that respect?
Well, I don't know what more concessions you refer to, because I'm aware that just about all our member states, I'm not sure if Jamaica has because of the structural adjustment program, but just about all our member states have some system of providing concessions for investments. And I'm not aware, I hear repeated statements being made about not providing the local private sector with concessions, but as far as I'm aware, there's a system of concessions that member states manage. Some of it comes to us in the sense that some of the member states utilize the framework of the CSME to seek derogations from inputs into manufacturing, for instance, that allows for these items to be imported in that would be to assist in the production. You raise a very interesting point, however. The private sector is not a homogeneous group. So you have the producing private sector wanting to produce, and you have the importing private sector saying, I want to import. And that is why we feel that bringing the private sector together at a regional level, a representative group, we cannot interact with all of these various factions in the private sector. And the proposed private sector organization of the Caribbean, which is what is maybe coming about, hopefully can help us to bridge that gap. But the issue of poultry, the Poultry Association of the Caribbean is very, very active. They're one of the groups that we meet with regularly, that is at the regional level. They're coordinating among the producing groups. And we are satisfied that they are producing quality products, and they have the capacity. In some of our countries, like in Guyana, for instance, where the market base is there, there's hardly any poultry products imported. They're self-sufficient. I think it's a little more difficult to break even in smaller populations, and that's where the need to export for economies of scale becomes very important, and again, the standards for the foods. But we have to encourage local production. You've pointed to the fact that we import sometimes poultry imported into the region that's months and months old, and there's nothing nicer than a nice local stew chicken instead of the frozen stuff that we get. So that's another aspect of promoting healthy lifestyles and promoting eating healthy foods, which links into our health issues and so on. So there's a number of areas that we have to tackle: the production side, the promotion of eating what we produce, always bearing in mind that chicken is the cheapest source of protein in our diets, and we have to balance one with the other.
Prime Hutchins, the Government Information Service. Sir, has CARICOM taken a unified position on the decriminalization of cannabis? What is the position of CARICOM on this?
You recall that the heads of government appointed a marijuana commission, and the marijuana commission reported. The commission report is actually available on our website for those who would wish to read it and to see what's being done. And it is the basis upon which our member states are utilizing to see how they treated the matter domestically. The commission was an independent commission. It was deliberately an independent commission that went out. I believe it was able to consult in all but 2 member states, if my memory serves correctly. So they got feedback from a range of different stakeholders, those in favor of, those not in favor of, in terms of decriminalization or the use or the medicinal use of the herb. We consulted, as I said, a wide range. So that document is the base document upon which member states would, at the national level, determine how they treated the matter. Because you still have contending interest groups at the national level. That some say you should not decriminalize, and some say you should keep the status quo. as it is. So that's where we are. We've done the bit of work. It's a tremendous piece of work. It's available to the public, very well informed from the medical standpoint, from the social standpoint, from the religious standpoint, from the impact on youth and the fact that you're caught with one spliff and you have a criminal record for how long. All of these matters were taken into account, and the recommendations are there. The member states now need to determine how they act upon them.
So Ajal Fred Hot 7 TV. My question is in regards to disaster management for member states, in regards to assistance after a natural disaster. Is there a plan in place to aid? If not, will this be part of discussions?
Well, there is a system in place through CDEMA, the CARICOM, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Unit, that triggers a whole host of things immediately after, well, just prior to disaster when you know it's coming, because you can always see a hurricane coming. Most times you see a hurricane coming. Not an earthquake, unfortunately, but the hurricanes we can predict with a few days. And there's a whole system in place that triggers immediate post-disaster relief. You go into the immediate post-disaster is like to people's rescuing people and that sort of thing. And the more long-term thing is to generate the aid. And that system, in terms of, it includes the donors as well. And they meet regularly. Not only during a disaster, pre-hurricane season, so already they've met. That is a group that is chaired by the head of CDEMA. The deputy chair is the head of UNDP. And UNDP coordinates, United Nations Development Program, coordinates with the other donors. And we see the donors. So that is there. But we're looking to see now, how do you strengthen that? Because the experience we had with the hurricane season in 2017, when I believe 9 countries of the Caribbean community, 9 countries in the CARICOM, were affected, if you include St. Martin. And how do you, where we had a substantial CARICOM population that were of interest to all of our member states, how do you strengthen what we have in place to provide assistance for a longer term? And going before that, as I mentioned before, how do member states access the resources that is necessary to build resilience? And resilience is not only about seawalls and bridges, you know. Resilience is about resilience in terms of the social resilience, the economic resilience. And those are some of the things that we're looking at. We're actually doing very quietly some work with CDEMA, with UNDP. It's not yet ready to reach the stage of heads for a proposal on how you strengthen that mechanism, but it's very much in place. In the meantime, we're strengthening our relations with those countries who have come to our assistance, France, the Netherlands, United States, the British, in terms of having a more coordinated response to disasters.
Good morning, Joshua St. Amy from the St. Lucia Star. Going back to the cannabis question and CSME on a whole, with some countries moving forward with legislation, do you believe that with others not doing so, that this can pose a threat also to CSME?
Well, cannabis is not related to CSME in any way, shape, or form. It's not. So I'm not understanding.
We're talking about the free movement of people and money and goods.
No, cannabis, you need to understand, cannabis right now is a banned substance for international trade, you know. It is governed by a protocol at the United Nations. And no country is allowed to trade in marijuana or marijuana products, unless it's under some very, I know there's the question of how do you treat with medications that are derived from the cannabis plant. And even that is under some discussion. Even within the United States, where some of the states have liberalized, you can't transport the herb across the state borders, the state lines. So we're not encouraging anybody to go and start moving with marijuana. You will be arrested. There's no doubt about it. We are moving a banned substance. But what we've done is looking at decriminalizing marijuana at the national level. Not about trading in the herb. Now we see a potential for medicinal marijuana. There are persons in our region who have done a lot of research on it, in Jamaica in particular. And I believe my memory is correct that they may even have patented, is the word patent? Yeah. The certain medications that are derived from it. And research is ongoing. And a number of member states are looking at how do you use that as a part of the industry, the pharmaceutical industry. That will be a very controlled industry, which is different than individuals having for recreational use or for religious use. Do not try to cross the border with marijuana. You're going to be arrested. And for those countries where it's not decriminalized, you have to respect that the laws are still there. Until the government takes action, the laws are still there. You have to respect the laws.
Good morning. Jessie Leonce, Carib Update. Let's go back to the advancing of CSMA. The Commission on the Economy, you mentioned earlier that there has been some progress, but not as much as would have been anticipated. Can you speak to the extent of what has not been done, perhaps? Give us some insight based on what you know. I don't want you to let the cat out of the bag for Dr. Prasad, but if you could give us some extent as to what has not been done and how it will hamper our progress going forward from this week.
Well, I think the Commission on the Economy is looking at the bigger growth issues, and not necessarily at the implementation plan on the CSMA. That is separate. I've linked the two because the CSMA provides a platform for economic growth. So the Commission will look at it more at a macro level. Some of the issues that are plaguing us, some growth, debt management, and those sort of things. In terms of the CSMA plan, there's, for instance, give you an example of issues where I think that we are lagging behind that ought not to be lagging behind. The heads of government have agreed so far on 10 categories plus 2 for free movement in our community. I say 10 plus 2 because they've agreed on 2 additional, but the technical work to govern, to inform what will be the requirement for movement is still being done. So it is not yet operationalized. But the 10 categories plus agriculture workers and security personnel is what we're looking at as 2 new categories to be added. Of the 10 that have already been agreed, member states who were given the opportunity to pass the legislation, and in the interim, having not passed the legislation, because we know legislative agendas take time, to put in administrative procedures. The CCJ recognizes that member states can do that. Those who have passed the CARICOM Community Act, you can do that. And those who have passed, and all our member states have passed the CARICOM Treaty into law. So any obligation that comes out of it, they ought to be able to use administrative procedures to allow it to happen. What we are finding is that there are still member states who have not passed the legislation, but worse yet, who have not put all of the administrative procedures in place to allow for that. And that's what we're going to be looking at. I'm not going to be calling names right now because persons I know, we've had a series of meetings since the December meeting in December, one-on-one with the member states. And that has proven to be very, very helpful in, sometimes it's lack of understanding. You know? I mean, I hate to say that, but on what needs to be done at the member state level. I'm sorry to put it that way, but the capacity doesn't seem to be there to go ahead and do what has to be done. So we're finding that since we've been having these one-on-one meetings with the member states individually, the technical staff at the CSMA unit, and that we've seen some progress already from December. But we need to do more of that, more of the hand-holding, unfortunately. We have to do more of it.
We have a question online, I understand.
Yes, we do. It's from Facebook, on CARICOM Facebook, from Eddie Lane, News Update Guyana. What is CARICOM's position on the current political climate in Guyana following the passage of the December 21st no confidence motion? And what appears to be a position by the government to ignore the consequences? And basically they're asking, what is the position of CARICOM?
Well, the matter is before the courts. It is what you call, what's that famous Latin term? Sub judice. And the community has a standard policy. When matters are before the courts, you let the court do what it has to do. The court has met, the CCJ has met, they met and they're going to meet again on the 12th of July. And we have to wait to see what happens. We've been I personally have been monitoring the situation very, very closely. I live in Guyana. This is my temporary home. I have met with the president. I've met with the leader of the opposition on more than one occasion. So I'm receiving information, their views. But I am not going to make any public pronouncement until we know what is the situation. The court has to pronounce, and if we see what happens afterwards, if the pronouncements or the judgments, the subsequent judgments are not adhered to, then there's a problem. But until the judicial process is in review, I know persons are impatient, but there's room for the judicial review, it's there. And we must allow this to happen, and we'll see what happens after the 12th of July.
We have 2 more questions.
Peter Richards, CMC. Is the president of Haiti coming to the summit?
Yes, he is.
Will CARICOM therefore look at the situation unfolding in Haiti? Do we
There
expect
will be a discussion.
a discussion?
Yes.
I noticed when you did your opening statement, you made no reference to the conflict, the ongoing conflict in Venezuela. Given the fact that at the latest situation at the OAS, where you still had St. Lucia, Bahamas, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, and another CARICOM, and 4 CARICOM countries, voting for an OAS resolution that more or less recognizes the representative of the opposition leader, Juan Guaido. Is CARICOM split on that issue? Or are we still maintaining, quote unquote, a fact? I don't want to use that word, but just for camera's sake, that they are united.
Absolutely not. There are issues, it's not, as you point out, there are issues on Venezuela upon which some member states have a different view. But there's a common view on a number of issues that we adhere to very, very strongly. The principle of non-interference, non-intervention. The issue that there must be dialogue between the opposition and the government. The issue of non-politicization of aid. The issue that there must be a peaceful resolution. The issue of the recognition of the Constitution and the rule of law. All of which are principles up to this day that every single member state, whether they recognize Juan Guaido or not, or they recognize President Maduro or not, adhere to those principles. As distinct from others who are demanding that there be regime change or other avenues. We cannot afford any kind of this thing to escalate into a kind of violent confrontation in Venezuela. Venezuela is part of the Caribbean in terms of the Caribbean Sea washes Venezuela. The neighbors, the two closest neighbors to barring Colombia to Venezuela is Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago. And their consequences, already we're seeing the consequences for Trinidad and Tobago in terms of what's happening in Venezuela with the number of refugees who are entering and the negative impact some of that may have on the community. And it's not only as far as those two countries, they're moving up the chain of islands. So the region remains very united on these principles of non-interference, non-intervention, dialogue. We were the voice in the wilderness. They said, how could you be asking for dialogue when the situation is so bad? But guess what? There is dialogue taking place. And we have, the small group of heads have reached out and have done some things, and now we hear another country is allowing for dialogue to take place. So the community was spot on in terms of what the principles are adhered to.
Given that Norway seems to be moving towards this situation in Venezuela, will that be a topic discussed at this meeting? Venezuela
will be a topic to be discussed.
Well, I'm asking Venezuela is being discussed with Norway at this meeting?
Well, Norway has taken a position of, as you have seen in the media, of not making any public pronouncements. I'd rather at this point not to comment on as to whether or not there will be a discussion with Norway. I have to respect Norway in terms of how they're proceeding. From all accounts, that they are making some progress. This will be the 3rd meeting, I believe, that's going to be held next week. And I think we have to respect the process and respect the silence on this for the time being. Let us see if there's anything that we could talk about afterwards. But for the time being, I would rather not comment on that.
Final question.
Yes. Thank you. Janika Simon again from Choice TV. This is somewhat of a follow-up to my colleague about Venezuela. You mentioned that Trinidad and Guyana have seen the biggest impact in terms of human movement out of Venezuela. Is there any intention at this meeting or other meetings to have a CARICOM approach to not the political crisis, but the humanitarian crisis? What do we do with Venezuelan migrants making their way up the chain? Is it fair for individual countries to have to bear the full brunt of having these migrants enter their borders, or is this something that CARICOM can agree on a unified approach to easing that humanitarian situation?
Well, the issues of refugees is one, as you know, that is not unique to our region. We know what's happening in other parts of the world, and these things issues are governed by international convention, international law. And basically the region subscribes to those issues. Of course, the costs of these things can be quite prohibitive. And these two countries are especially Trinidad and Tobago. That's where the greatest number thus far. So we are apprised of what is going on, and is there a common position? I think the other countries are not experiencing anywhere near that. The only other countries I understand that, well, they're not even associated with us. I'm speaking ahead of my time. I was about to mention Aruba and Curacao, but they're not part of us yet. So I know they're also experiencing. There is exchange of information. I'm sure we'll be briefed on what's going on. But it's an issue, from what I can read in the media and some of other conversations, that Trinidad is trying its best to handle, and Guyana as well. Guyana having such a vast borderline, territorial border with Venezuela.
Are we as CARICOM kind of leaving our sister countries of Trinidad
Not at all, not at all.
out to dry? Because
not at all.
They are the ones that are
not at all.
with this situation.
Not at all. We're not leaving out to dry, but I do not know what else would be expected of the rest of the community in that particular instance as of now. Let us see what happens. That I'm sure some of these issues will be discussed. We know what is happening to regularize the persons who come in, and let's see what happens with that.
Thank you very much to members of the media. Thank you very much, Secretary General. And we look forward to a very fruitful meeting and the press conference at the end, where I hope to see as many of you as are here today. Thank you very much.
Let me add my own words of thank you to members of the media. Thank you very much.